Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive sharing session. It's really wonderful to have you here in the studio today. Welcome to Empower Fantastic Life. Find your power, live without limits. Today, we're going to act as your personal consultants for a very specific type of health checkup. We're zeroing in entirely on your emotional well-being and inner peace, drawing on some absolutely brilliant insights from clinical therapist Nedra Glover-Tawwab's work on setting boundaries.
So tell me, have you ever felt just completely exhausted by a relationship? Maybe it's a friend, a family member, or a coworker, but you felt just way too guilty to actually say no to them? Well, I want to validate those feelings right now. That emotional exhaustion you're dealing with, it isn't just the unavoidable cost of being a nice person. As our source material points out, this pain actually stems directly from one single root cause, and that is a lack of healthy boundaries.
To cure this burnout and really reclaim your peace, here's our agenda for today's explainer. First, we'll look at recognizing your boundary crisis. Then, the 3 states of boundaries, followed by the 6 invisible domains of personal boundaries. Next up, a practical 2-step prescription to actually enforce them, and finally, how to overcome the inevitable guilt and pushback.
Okay, let's dive right in. Part 1. Recognizing your boundary crisis. Before we can treat any issue, we've got to diagnose the symptoms first. Using the framework established by Nedra Glover-Tawwab, there are 3 major warning signs that tell us you're in a boundary crisis. First up is burnout. This happens when you're constantly putting the needs of others way before your own, and it literally leads to physical and emotional depletion. Second is resentment. That's that bitter, heavy feeling of being used, or honestly, just being mad at yourself because you couldn't refuse a request. And third is avoidance. This is when you just flee conflict altogether. You ghost, you disappear, or you ignore messages simply because you don't want to deal with the discomfort of saying no.
Let's ground this in a real-world example so it's instantly clear. Imagine you're always saying yes to weekend work, but on the inside, you are secretly seething at your boss. That right there is a textbook combination of burnout and resentment. You aren't just tired, your internal alarm bells are going off, telling you that a really critical boundary has just been breached.
All right, moving on to part 2, the 3 states of boundaries.
Let's categorize your current level of boundary health. We usually fall into one of 2 pretty unhealthy extremes before we actually find our balance. On one side, we've got porous boundaries. Imagine a house with absolutely no doors. Anyone can just walk in at any time. People with porous boundaries tend to overshare, they just can't say no, and they bend over backwards to please others purely out of a fear of being disliked. But on the totally opposite extreme, we have rigid boundaries. This is like a fortress with a raised drawbridge and massive stone walls. Folks here completely refuse help. They shut everyone out, and they isolate themselves just to avoid getting hurt.
And here's an analogy that brilliantly illustrates the danger of those porous boundaries. It's literally like losing your own GPS signal because you're entirely focused on navigating someone else's car. You become so wrapped up in fixing other people's lives and accommodating their directions that you completely lose track of your own destination. And honestly, that is exactly how codependency forms.
So the absolutely crucial point here is reaching the gold standard, which is healthy boundaries. This means knowing your own values and expressing your needs crystal clearly. It means acting like a house with a sturdy door. You can lock it when you need to protect yourself, but you also hold the key to open it up and safely show vulnerability to the right people. It also means you can calmly accept it when someone else says no to you.
Which brings us to part 3, the 6 domains of personal boundaries.
A lot of times we think setting a boundary just means learning to say the word no. But it's actually so much bigger than that. There are 6 invisible domains where trespasses happen, and I guarantee you're going to have a light bulb moment identifying yours right now. We have physical boundaries, like uninvited touching or someone just barging into your room without knocking. We have sexual boundaries, which is all about respecting comfort and consent. Then there are intellectual boundaries. This gets crossed when someone belittles your personal beliefs or won't even let you hold a different opinion. Emotional boundaries are violated when you're constantly used as someone's emotional dumping ground. Material boundaries involve people borrowing your things or your money without even asking. And finally, time boundaries. A classic everyday example of this, those unpaid after-hours work texts.
Let's move right along to part 4, 2 steps to enforce boundaries. Now that we've mapped out exactly where our boundaries actually live, how do we set them in motion? The framework is elegantly simple, but I'll admit it requires a bit of courage. Step 1 is clear communication. You've got to use I statements. Dropping hints or just sulking in silent anger, that is completely ineffective. Your boundary literally has to be explicitly spoken aloud. For instance, you might say, I need you to send this by 8 p.m. or I cannot review it. Step 2 is action and consequences. Honestly, this is the hardest part. If the boundary is crossed, you must enforce the consequence. To put that into everyday terms, let's say your time boundary is that you don't answer work texts during dinner, while your action is leaving that phone on Do Not Disturb and actually ignoring the buzz. A boundary without a real action to back it up is really nothing more than an ineffective complaint.
And finally, Part 5, overcoming guilt and pushback.
As your consultant today, I absolutely need to prepare you for the psychological side effects of enforcing your new rules. When you first start saying no, you're going to feel incredibly guilty. But consider this quote your psychological vaccine. Guilt is normal, but it shouldn't stop you from doing what's right. That feeling of guilt does not mean you've made a mistake. It simply means you're breaking an old, comfortable, but ultimately unhealthy habit. Furthermore, you absolutely have to expect pushback. The people who previously benefited from your lack of boundaries, they are not going to like the new rules. They might call you selfish or difficult, but remember, their displeasure is their own responsibility to manage, not yours. You do not need to continuously harm yourself just to keep a superficial peace.
I want to leave you with this core thesis today. It's the ultimate anchor point and empowering takeaway of our entire explainer session. You cannot change their behavior. You can only change how you engage with them. Listen, setting boundaries is not an attempt to control other people. It is an incredibly powerful tool to take control of yourself, to protect your own energy, and to dictate exactly how you will participate in a relationship.
So as we wrap up our consultation, I want to leave you with this question to provoke some deep thought. Looking back at your physical, sexual, intellectual, emotional, material, and time boundaries, which of the 6 boundaries will you reclaim today? Take this knowledge, apply it to your real life, and just watch how your inner peace transforms.
You've been listening to Empower Fantastic Life, Jaeger Empowerment Academy. See you next time. Bye-bye.